Hey y'all! I'm going to give you a minute to hop on and start chatting. So, let me make sure that's all ready while you guys get settled in. This is going to be a little bit different. So, I have something that, hey, how are you? So, this is a little bit different. This is for a homework assignment. I know, boring, right? But we will be streaming tonight for the game, so don't worry. So, this is a homework assignment, and I encourage you to ask questions, whatever. I am getting graded, so I do ask you to be, ask questions and just kind of learn, hopefully, that kind of thing. So, what I am teaching on currently. Tonight we have a special little Among Us thing planned that's going to have a theme, and so stay tuned for that later. But currently I am going to talk about the positive, believe it or not, the positive outcomes of suffering. I will wait a couple minutes for a couple more people to get in, and then we will get started. I know you're probably already thinking, what? Nothing good comes from bad, right? Well, let's see. I am going to have Discord on, so if you want to ask questions there, I will be in the lobby. Just remember to be quiet and be respectful because I am being graded. And hopefully y'all can... Yes, Abel, I would classify being bullied as suffering. Yes, that is one way. I absolutely agree. I agree with that. Okay, so... Thank you, Nicholas. Okay, so let's get started here. Infinity, are you in? Okay. All right. First off, I want to tell you a story of my own suffering. Like I said, Abel, yes. One way of suffering does have to do with being bullied. There are many forms of suffering. But, yeah. But I want to talk to you about my own suffering and, well, one of the ways I have suffered myself and some things that have come out of that. And if Infinity forgives me, he is a part of this story. Not that he makes me suffer, but you'll get it after a bit. First off, I need to tell you that Infinity was born premature, and I didn't understand that. I didn't understand the things that were going to happen during that pregnancy. I didn't understand the health issues he would end up having. It was just something that completely took me off guard. I was not a Christian my entire life. In fact, I did not become a Christian until I was an adult. So my first 3 children were born while I was not a Christian, and then I have this child that I felt like, oh, it's going to be a really blessed pregnancy and really blessed baby because, hey, I'm following God now, right? When you follow God, good things happen. So while I was a single mother, I gave my life to Christ. It was an amazing moment in my life. My life was forever changed. The person you see now is not the person you would have seen back then. Like, not even close. Like, not even close. I'm drastically different. In fact, the entire reason why I'm doing this channel and why I reach out to you and one reason why I care so much about you is because the heart that God has given me for all of you and to help pull you out of the darkness that you're in. No, I'm not saying you're sinning and all that. That's a whole nother topic. I'm just saying we are in a dark time in history. And lots of people are suffering. And I want to meet you where you are, as you are, with no expectations, and just try to give you a little bit of light in the stuff that's you know, going on. So, that being said, I gave my life to Christ. I remarried to Warrior, whom you have seen on the channel. I married him, and not too terribly long after, a few months later, I was pregnant with Infinity. So I had this idea that here I was in this Christian marriage, living a Christian life, following God, and now I was going to have my Christian baby, and everything was going to go perfect. Well, little did I know that wasn't the case. I ended up having severe complications to where they said that my body was aborting the baby, and that he or she, at that time we didn't know, was not going to survive. And to keep my appointment with my OB doctor, no heart rate had been found. They couldn't find the heart rate anymore. They said, just let your body do away with it and then see your doctor, but keep your next appointment with your pregnancy doctor anyway. So I went home and I cried. In fact, I kind of laid in bed and cried for quite a while. I didn't understand. I thought I was doing things right. I thought I was following God, and this is not how things were supposed to be. It was kind of like a situation, C.S. Lewis. I don't know if you've heard of C.S. Lewis. If you haven't heard of him specifically, I'm certain you have heard of the Chronicles of Narnia. He wrote that series. But in his book, The Problem of Pain, he stated, if you ask me to believe that this is the work of the benevolent and omnipotent spirit, I reply that all evidence points in the opposite direction. Either there is no spirit behind the universe, or else a spirit indifferent to good and evil, or else an evil spirit. Right? That's how I felt. I was a Christian, but all of a sudden I was like, excuse me, I'm doing things right. What's going on here? And I didn't know what to think. Well, I kept my appointment, and about a month later, they found his heart rate. His heartbeat, like, came back. He basically had life back in him, and he was possibly going to be okay. He had a 97% chance that he was not going to be okay. They said, still expect for my body to reject him and for him not to be born, so on and so forth. That led to him being born premature. He was supposed to be born towards the end of October, but he was born the middle of September. So he was quite a bit premature, and in that he had to be in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit. Oh, don't feel bad, Ben. It's okay. It gets better. Okay. So in all of that, his lungs collapsed. And yes, this is Infinity's story as much as it is mine, so you will get to know him a little better through this story. In all of that, his lungs had collapsed, his oxygen continued to drop, and things did not look good, so they had to do a thing called a CPAP. He had to get rushed by emergency to a different hospital because the hospital I was at did not have the resources needed to take care of him. So he was rushed to another hospital, and I was at the other hospital, so we were separated, which was awful for mother and baby alike. It was just horrible. He spent some time in the NICU. The CPAP and the surfactant that they gave him helped his lungs to reinflate, and eventually he was able to leave the NICU and come home. He had a lot of health issues growing up. He has severe sensitivities to a lot of different things. He has asthma. He has all this stuff, that just kind of added to my questions, right? So this entire time, these years go by, and I start to wonder, excuse me, okay, you brought the baby here, and he's alive, but he's suffering all the time. Yes, I remember you, Keisha. So he was suffering all the time. Okay? I still had questions. I was like, why? Why, God? If you are good, why did you have all of this happen? What have I done wrong? What is going on? I do not understand. Well, there's another person that was doing what was right and following God and had a lot of bad happen to him. His name was Joseph. I don't know if you've heard of him in the Bible, but if you've heard of the story of the coat of many colors, it was a coat that was given to him by his father. His mother had died in childbirth with his brother. He had a lot of half brothers, okay? And the half brothers resented him because he was kind of the favorite of the father. Hey, baby! So he was kind of the favorite of the father, and they decided to get rid of him. Okay? Long story short, they get rid of him by selling him to some travelers going to Egypt. And then they go home and they tell their dad, oh my gosh, we don't know what happened. Look, here's the coat of many colors. It's full of blood. He has died. Some wolves attacked him. We're sorry, Father. His father falls into a very, very, very deep depression. Okay. Meanwhile, Joseph is not dead. He's alive. And he gets transported to Egypt, where he faces other trials. One time, Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him, and he refused. And then so she got mad and screamed, and she said, hey, I'm sorry, but he tried to attack me and rape me, and da-da-da. So he got thrown in prison, even though he did nothing wrong. Joseph was able to interpret dreams. Okay? Now, first off, let me get you this. I have all this together. So, what happens is, these stories of Joseph, all of his suffering and everything, turn our attention to God's blessing. Yes, he was thrown in prison, but it turns our attention to God's blessing as he places Joseph somewhere that Joseph can bring a blessing to the entire world as a representative of Abraham's family. Okay? It doesn't look like it. He's sitting in a prison. He doesn't know what to do. But Joseph can, in fact, interpret dreams. So, let me get you the passage to give you a little bit of idea. You don't have to have a Bible. But if you do, I'm in Genesis 41. So here's how the story goes, okay? After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and behold, there came out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows, get this, you're going to like this, right? Ate up. I'm sorry. They ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows. And Pharaoh awoke, and he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So in the morning, his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was not a single one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. However, Joseph was able to interpret dreams. So Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they quickly brought him up out of the pit, which was the prison. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came before the Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. However, I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. After that, Pharaoh proceeded to tell Joseph the story. Joseph interprets it to say that there's going to be famine coming to the land, and after the famine, there is going to be a harvest, and he instructed Pharaoh, prepare for the famine. Like, he said, you have this good season currently, and since you have good grain, you have good season currently, you need to prepare for the famine that's to come, so that people will not be damaged as, hey Charlie, hey, everybody give love to Charlie, he's my pastor. So he said, you need to prepare for this famine that's coming up, okay? And in this famine, if you prepare ahead of time and you create these storehouses of all this grain and have basically a plethora of food and everything for everyone, then your people will not suffer as badly. Now, instead of being in the pit, instead of being in the dungeon, instead of being in the prison, instead of being in his suffering, Pharaoh exalted Joseph to having him second in command. Basically, the only person who was higher than Pharaoh was Joseph himself. He had gone from being in the muck and the mire, the nastiest of life, and was risen to an extremely high position where he was able to instruct people. He was in charge of the storehouses. He was able to direct people. He directed Pharaoh's house. All of these suddenly happened. Then we move on, because I bet you're wondering what's going on. Well, what do you think is going on? Because what did I just say? In the dream, there were these times of plenty. They still had grain, they still had food, and they had more than enough because they had enough to store for the famine, right? Well, what comes after this time? The famine, right? So in Genesis 47:13 it says, now there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished by the reason of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain that they had bought. And Joseph brought the money to Pharaoh's house. And when the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone. And Joseph answered, give your livestock, and I will give you food in exchange for your livestock if your money is gone. So he was providing a way for people to have what they needed. Hey, Maylee. So he was providing a way for people to have what they needed. If they didn't have the money to purchase the grains, they could give up their livestock, and they could still get the grains and the food that they needed. So Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, and it stands to this day that Pharaoh should have fed. The land of the priests alone did not become Pharaoh's. Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it, and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. Now, how exactly did that happen? Well, Joseph's brothers ended up being the people who were coming and asking for food. However, because Joseph had acclimated to the Egyptian lifestyle, he wore the clothing, and he had grown a beard, they did not recognize him. So they're coming to their brother. They did not know it was their brother, and they're asking for food, and they have nothing to give. However, Joseph does recognize his brothers. And what ends up happening is they ask him to leave the favorite brother, Benjamin, who is Joseph's only other full-blood brother, right? He asks them to bring him and leave him there, and this broke the heart of the father, and he said, in exchange, you go get your father and you bring him here, and everything will be well. Okay? So, long story short, they went back to the father after they found out Joseph was their brother. He did reveal himself to them. And they went back and to their father, told him he was alive, told him he was in Egypt, and because of everything that the brothers had done, because they sold him to people who were headed to Egypt, who he in turn became in charge of Egypt, his family, his entire family, Joseph's entire family, was able to come to Egypt and not die of the famine. So yes, God does bring good out of suffering. I know one of the things you're probably asking is, okay, but you kind of left us hanging. Like, here's Infinity, and he's a premature baby, and last you were told he was suffering all these health issues. What good happened? Excuse me. Like, what happened? Okay, let me tell you what happened. All right. So, several years later, down the road, I had been in a car accident, and I was actually at my physical therapist's office, and I was laying on the traction table where they tried to stretch me out, and my phone rang, and it was my brother. If there's one person I always answer, it's my brother. There's only he and I. We have no other siblings, and he means the absolute world to me. So if he calls, you can bet I'm going to answer, even if I'm in the middle of a traction table. So I answered, and he was distraught. He said my nephew had been born. He was born full term, but he was born and he was not doing well. He was in the NICU, and he didn't know what to do. He was scared for his child. He had tried 10 years. He and his wife tried 10 years for this child, and he didn't know what to do. So I asked my physical therapist if I could get off the table and go to the hospital. She said, of course. She let me go, and I ran straight to the hospital. I met him up in the labor and delivery floor, and I asked him what was going on, and he explained he couldn't keep his oxygen up, and he was struggling. He's full term. He's a good weight, but they don't know what's going on. I took my brother aside. I told him the story that happened to Infinity, and I said, if they ask you, you need to listen to me, brother. Brother, I was like going to say his name. If they ask you to do CPAP and surfactant, if his lungs collapse, you need to say yes. I know you're going to want to say no, because they're going to tell you all the scary side effects, like the lungs could explode, all this stuff. But you have to say yes. You need to listen to me. You have to say yes. And he's like, well, hopefully it won't get to that. The next day, it did. The next day, we were in the room with his wife. My nephew was in the NICU. And they came in and got my brother for an emergency. And my nephew's lungs had collapsed, and they were sticking together. His oxygen was dropping no matter how much oxygen they kicked up. And he was in a life or death situation. My brother came back after quite a while, came in the room, and he said he couldn't talk to the people in the room. So he walked out. My mom looked at me, and I was like, yeah, I know. It was like, go get your brother, because I'm the big sister. And I was like, yeah, I know. So I ran after him, and I grabbed his arm, and I was like, hey, and he said, I don't want to talk. I need to be alone now. I'm like, let's just sit down, let's breathe, okay? So he sat down, and I sat next to him, and you could hear the anguish in his voice. And he said, you better be right. I just trusted my son's life with you. They asked me if I would be willing to sign off to do the surfactant and the CPAP, and I agreed only because you told me to. If my son dies, I'll never forgive you. So I sat and I prayed with him, and I talked to him. He's actually ordained as a youth pastor, and I spoke with him for a while, and he was saying that he would do anything to save the life of his son. I know how that felt. It's not sad. So 30 minutes later, my brother was called back in the NICU. He came back out about 20 minutes later, and they said that his oxygen saturation had gone up, that his lungs were functioning properly, and he was going to be okay because they had done the CPAP and the surfactant to his lungs. My nephew is alive today because of the suffering I went through. And that took years to see. So instead of that question where I was like, well, if there's a good God, how can he allow this stuff? Instead, also like C.S. Lewis, I was saying, if the universe is so bad, or even half so bad, how on earth did human beings ever come to attribute it to the activity of a wise and good creator? How was I able to attribute that situation to my son and my nephew and my brother? If I promise you, if I had not had the experience with my son, my brother would have told them no, because my brother is a very distrusting person. And he would have told them no, and my nephew likely would have died. So God had that planned way back then. All those years prior to my nephew being born, he knew that was going to happen. He knew that he would see me through it, and he knew that it would be used for good. Just like Joseph's suffering was used to save the lives of many, my suffering was used to save the life of my nephew. And honestly, although I wouldn't want to go through it again, I am incredibly thankful. Now, it's your turn, okay? I want you to just think, and if you do not have to, but just think of a difficult time in your life. If you want to chat what it is, or what it was, or maybe what it's currently going on, then go ahead and do so. You do not have to. You can keep it private. You can message me privately after this is over if you want to. You know, I've got Discord and the various means of communication, so definitely get a hold of me if you want to talk. If you do want to share it, you're more than welcome to share it. But I want you to take a minute and think of a difficult time in your life, and think, how has, or maybe it hasn't come yet, how has or how could that be used for good? Is there a plan there that maybe you're not seeing? Is there a life that may need to hear your story? Is there a foundation maybe you'll want to start someday? Is there a friend that you'll understand better because you struggled with depression and now they are? Just think about it. Think of a difficult time in your life and how that could potentially be used for good. And then after a minute, I'll time about a minute. After that, I'll give people time to think. Then I will pray for all of you, and then we'll end the stream. I know, silence. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, Russian boy. Let's talk more about that, okay? We don't have to here, but I know how you feel. Those dogs are important. That's heartbreaking. I'm sorry. And see, you are here. That's good. I'm happy you're here. I'm very thankful that you're here. Okay, about a minute's up, so let me pray for you. You can participate or you don't have to. It's completely up to you. You're not obligated in any way, but if you want to have a moment of silence to continue to think about it, or if you want to join in the prayer, then you're more than welcome to. Or if you just want to listen, You can do that too. Whatever you prefer, there's no pressure. Okay. Heavenly Father, I just ask that you give strength and wisdom to those facing difficult times. We know that your plan results in happy endings, but sometimes these endings are a long way away. Sometimes they're several years, sometimes they're not so long, sometimes they happen right away. And when we're in the middle of that suffering, it can be so difficult to see anything good. It can be so difficult to imagine life being better or getting better. In quarantine, being isolated from friends and family and peers at school, things don't seem to be getting better. We don't know what to do or where to go or how to act or what's okay or what's not okay. But we can always, quarantine or not, turn to you. And you can give us that peace that surpasses all understanding, Lord. I pray that you give that peace generously in complete and total abundance to those listening to this stream. If they need help, encourage them to reach out. If they need someone to talk to, encourage them to do so. If they're doing great, encourage them to reach out to a friend or a family member who might not be doing so great. But Lord, use this time to help us to grow closer to you and closer to each other. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Yay! So yes, we will be streaming in about 2 hours for the Among Us. We are going to have a theme, a cheese theme. So be thinking about your name. It has to be a cheese name. And you cannot be the color that you normally are when you play. And it cannot be a cheese name that hints to who you are. It's going to be a mystery as to who everyone is. So I will explain more when I start the stream later with Infinity. But until then, we have the best